Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, checking out virtual reality. I'm very excited to be here. I thought there would be more people, but this is fine. So, how many people here have actually tried the latest in virtual reality? Two people? Three people? That's latest would be anything since the Oculus Rift, not anything from the 90s. Okay, very good. So there are quite a few of you, which is great because I think it's a very unique time right now. I believe that we are living at a time before we had cell phones and smartphones. I remember very well how that was, and many people thought that was an odd thing. And then the cell phone reached critical mass, and then many people thought, that's not strange. Strange is actually me not having one because the cool people have one. So that's where we are with VR today. It's still not a mainstream technology. You guys hear me okay, right? I'm not used to this. So it's still not mainstream technology. I believe it'll become mainstream at the end of this year. And so right now, it feels a little strange. People wearing these bulky headsets, and it's something we haven't seen before. They look like an alien. But that'll change. That'll change. I'm very convinced that that'll change. And then it'll become like, okay, whoever doesn't have one, you're not cool. We're going to get to that point. And for me, this is a very unique and interesting time because I have the privilege of sharing VR, which is my passion, since I was a child with people that have never tried. We do this all the time. We have an office just a few blocks from here. We have a demo room. We have the latest in VR tech. And I get to see people's expression all the time. So we'll have a VR demo in a separate room here that you can check out after we're done here. I would love to have you guys there. I don't have anybody to help me today, so probably I'll be the one giving the demos. But VR is an experience. It's hard to explain. So a lot of times when we share on social media, we share things like photos of people trying VR. People don't get it. They don't get it because it's not about how you look and what you're wearing. It's about the experience that you're having. VR is the first medium as a computing platform that allows for immersion. Right? So we use the term presence. You experience presence. Presence means you actually forget that you're here. You are transported to another world. And this is impossible with any other medium. You can have super large screens in the theater or what have you. You're always going to enjoy what you're watching, but you're going to think, I'm not actually there in the story. I'm actually over here, and there's a world outside of what I'm seeing. This is not the case with VR. So this is one reason I believe that VR will take off this time. It didn't in the 90s. It had a setback as well as some other technologies. But this time it will because it provides for something really unique that no other medium provides. Also, another indicator for me, because I'm in business also, I'm not just an engineer. So I have to look for signals that indicate that VR will take off as a technology and that it's here to stay. And one of them is that we've had billions of dollars invested in this technology, but I mean just massive amounts of money. So just as an example, right, everybody knows the story that everything kind of started again with the Oculus Rift. Palmer Luckey was buying these expensive VR headsets. They used to cost $100,000 each. And he brought it into his basement down in California. And he started taking them apart, trying to figure out how it worked, how the technology worked, what was required, that sort of thing, right? So he was considered for a long time, a hardware hacker. It was a new term that wasn't very common until he started doing this. And he created something new. This is the beauty. I'm from Brazil originally, so this is really what appeals to me about American culture. The fact that you can just do something that's never done before. You can just play. You can just have fun. You can just try something new. And then out of that comes something that has never happened in history. And he was able to create presence. He created this thing that was really rudimentary. It was basically duct tape and hot glue and some lenses that he assembled from all this hardware that he had collected over years. and he was able to share with somebody the vision. And they were able to see it for a glimpse. It didn't work very well at the time, but they could see for a few seconds, like, wow, I enter another world. And in doing that, he was able to then start Oculus, and they did a Kickstarter campaign. And they thought, well, there's probably a demand for this. So, people kind of get what VR is, or at least the gamers and some enthusiasts. So they started this Kickstarter campaign with the goal of reaching $2 million, I believe, that they could then use to produce a prototype that they could sell. And one of the great things about Oculus, because we're working with a number of companies now, not just Oculus. As a matter of fact, we're now working closely with Oculus because Oculus is down in California. But I really admire Oculus. When they started, not so much today, when they started, they had this idea of making VR accessible to everyone, which is also something that really speaks to me. So their goal from the beginning was to make VR accessible. So they were able to, as Palmer Luckey was developing this prototype, in his mind, it wasn't to go out and spend all kinds of money acquiring components that were super expensive that would create that experience. From the beginning, he already started thinking, how can I create this with components that are cheap? Which wasn't possible in the 90s at all, but it became possible after the mobile revolution, and now we have such a, mobile phones are so ubiquitous now, right? That we can just, they get old every 6 months, and they just go to the trash, and you can just pick them up for free, and you can take it apart, and you can use the components to build new things, such as the VR headset that he was working on. So it started as just as a visual thing. VR in the beginning, as he created it, was just a visual thing. They say that the eyes is the highway to the brain in terms of data. So if you address vision, you address a huge part of the VR experience. And he did that in an affordable way. That's one of the great things that Oculus has done. It's affordable. So they thought, if we put this for sale for $300, $350, then we can raise $2 million, and then we can make this technology popular, and it'll go mainstream eventually. And what happened was that they actually raised over $20 million. So it was a huge surprise that they had. They didn't realize that demand was so much bigger than they thought. When you have an idea that something is going to be popular about a product that you have, and it turns out that it's over 10 times more popular than you ever thought, when you already thought that you were thinking big. So this is going to be huge. And they started working on the prototype. They called it the DK1. And then shortly after, they worked on a second prototype, the DK2. And sometime there in between, Facebook came to talk to them and acquired them for $2 billion. Which is remarkable, right? Because this guy started doing this at 17 years old. He's still very young. And to start a company that early and have a major company show up and say, we want to buy your company for $2 billion, it's the dream that a lot of people have. So that's kind of the beginning of the renaissance of VR that led to a lot of other things. He was working on that, and I believe that was the catalyst, but I can't say for sure, that led to Valve Corporation doing a lot of development in VR as well. So Valve, we work closely with them, and they've done amazing work. So you can go to the demo room that we have, and you can actually check out the latest that we have in terms of the VR tech. There's a prototype that just came out. It's a little more polished. We're going to get it this week. I couldn't get it fast enough. All these prototypes are very rare. We're very lucky to be in this area and have access to this, but they're very rare. Some of the controllers, they're handmade. They cost $5,000 each. It's very difficult to get a hold of them. And Valve created something really unique, which is the dream of anybody that actually is passionate about virtual reality. Valve was the first company to solve some technical issues that allowed for room-scale VR, which is what we have now. So when Oculus started, they had this idea that VR was really complex, and so many issues are difficult to solve. It's kind of like going to the moon when you've never done it before, right? It's a dream, and you think, we believe we can do it, but there's so many things that we need to solve in terms of engineering challenges that it's insurmountable. It's nothing but a dream, really. And they started working with some controllers, like the Xbox controller that we have. And for the most part, it's a seated experience. There's a camera in front of the Oculus Rift that does the positional tracking. So you're able to move your head and have this sense that you're moving around in a real world. It's a simulated world, but it's a real world. But you can't really go too far from the camera. If you do, it loses the tracking, and it's a very disconcerting experience. In fact, one of the issues that we had in the beginning with VR was motion sickness, right? Because if VR isn't done properly, people experience motion sickness, and then they don't want to do VR. They want to stay away from VR. So this is one of the biggest hurdles that VR has had. And if you don't have a seated experience and you move away from the positional tracking of the prototype that Oculus created, then you experience motion sickness. So that's one of the issues that we had that Valve was able to solve. The tracking that Valve created is incredibly precise. It's really amazing. It's an experience I can't describe with words. This is true everywhere, all the time. As a matter of fact, when Joe came to talk to me, he was looking for something. And the prototype that I had was malfunctioning, because it's a prototype. It doesn't work 100% yet. And he was about to walk away. He's a busy guy, and he's like, I don't have time for this. And I said, please wait 2 minutes. One of the reasons we had issues is because we're working with our prototype so much, so there's always new people coming to do development. Anyways, I said, please wait 2 minutes. And I was just praying, and I was like trying to get it to work, and I was able to get it to work. And then he had the experience, and he was blown away. And he said, we've got to have this at ConveyUX. This is the first time that we're having VR here at ConveyUX. And how does, I'm very passionate about VR, as you guys can tell, right? How does that have anything to do with user experience, which is what we're talking about here? So I'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, it's an entire new paradigm. For me, nothing gets me more excited than to work on something that has never existed before, whether it's space technology or what have you. I did a lot of work for Microsoft before when people didn't really understand the personal computer. More people here did than in Brazil, where I'm from. But it's still very strange for people to understand what computers could do for people. And so now it's kind of the same thing. People don't really understand what VR can do for the world, but I do. And for me, it's really exciting to be creating this technology that is not there yet. So with room scale VR, we have a lot of issues that are related to user experience, which is something I have a lot of knowledge and experience in terms of I was a web designer and a web developer before. Prior to that, I did a lot of work for Microsoft on UI, UX, with their software, with their client software, Office, and their operating system. So that's kind of my background a little bit. But now I'm doing VR, and VR is like the coolest thing. Because what Valve has created is a room scale VR, which is ideal 15 by 15. Is what would be ideal that they recommend. But some people may not have that. They may have if they're lucky, a 10 by 10, or maybe an 8 by 8. So the way that they develop their software, I can show you this when we are in the room, is that if it's too small, then they will not allow for the calibration to work. If it's too big, they're also going to say, your room is too big. So they've been able to do that in such a way that you can adjust the calibration to the size of your room. And the idea that I haven't talked to them about this. They're always busy. We talk sometimes, but not as much as I would like. My idea is that we want to replace the TV room that we have. There was a time when we didn't have TV rooms, and now we do. We have a room that has the TV, and it's the living room, and it's just normal that people sit on a couch and watch TV. And I believe that TV will be replaced by virtual reality. The TV is kind of an obsolete technology once you understand VR. VR allows for so much more. For example, VR allows for interaction, which the TV doesn't, right? The TV, you're a spectator, you're watching the news person, and you can see them, but they can't see you. I find that very dissatisfying. I don't know about you, but that just doesn't do it for me. I think that it's part of evolution to be able to interact with anybody in the world. And this is why I do VR, to create technology that allows for anybody to interact with anyone in the world. If I could just put in one sentence why I do VR and why I'm doing the work that I'm doing today with technology that we don't even have yet, it's for that reason. Because right now there are people that have great ideas, and they're very much like you in terms of who you are as a person and why you're here what your mission is on this planet, but you don't even know they exist, or you're not able to connect with them. They're on the other side of the planet. Sometimes they may not speak your language. They're never going to come here. You're never going to go where they are. So it's just an opportunity that's missed for something that could be created that's just not going to happen. And VR can really break that barrier. The internet has made a lot of progress already. We have that with social media. We're able to meet people in other parts of the world. We have marriage that happen that way. A lot of things that are virtual already. We have virtual friends, but VR can really take it to a whole new level. So let me see what we have here. The differences between AR and VR. So virtual reality is, I don't have my phone, so I'm not sure how much time it's taking me. Josh, he'll probably come back and tell me. I wanted to keep track of time. One of the reasons I love VR is because VR allows for a simulated world. Everything in VR practically is simulated. I should correct what I'm saying, because when I tell people about VR and they don't know the technology at all, and then they start thinking about the things that they know, trying to understand VR, there's basically a split. There's two different directions that people naturally go towards. One is cameras. One has to do with 360-degree cameras that get footage, and immediately they think, that's what I want to do. And basically what that is capturing the world as we know it and creating what we call a linear experience. So you could take the camera right here, and you could do a loop. You could go around the room, let's just say, and then you place the camera right here. And so when you create an experience with that, that's what the user is going to have. And if the camera went to the left and the user wants to go that way, they can't, because the camera doesn't do that. But you're very easily can capture this room. It can capture all this data. And there's a lot of work that has been done with that, by the way. There's a company that's very well funded that made deals with. So there's a company, I don't recall their name right now. They started in the beginning. They made deals with NFL and a lot of the large sporting companies. And they basically have this idea to sell unlimited tickets, which is an amazing idea, by the way, right? Because when they have, for example, the Super Bowl, they can make a fortune. They've already, it's such an art, the amount of money that they can make. But basically, there's a certain amount of, that they can charge per ticket, and then they can have the VIP ticket that some people are willing to pay, and there's a limit to that. There's a limit in terms of how much people are willing to pay. After you pass the limit, people simply won't pay. So they can make a fortune, but ultimately, it's a limited amount. However, if they're able to place the camera inside of the stadium, and you can have front row seat, let's say, and you can watch the game in real time from your home, then they can sell an unlimited amount of tickets, technically, right? And they could sell it for $20 and still make more money than they could through the typical ticket sales. So anyways, they've done that, and it works pretty well, actually, their technology. When you're there, you can watch everything in 360. The players are right in front of you. And when you look back, you can see the score, and you can see some information for the game. So that's what I'm telling you in terms of 360 footage. The camera is sitting there. Whatever the camera captures is something that you can see. We are doing some work with that, but that's not primarily what we do, Chronos. Primarily what we do is an interactive experience, which is different. And to create that, you have to use, right now, a game engine. So game engines, it's a technology that has been around for a long time, and it's evolved, and it got to a point, I don't know, in the 80s, where they started creating 3D worlds. But they were 3D worlds on a flat screen. They explored on a flat screen, using the game controller or the keyboard and the mouse. And it's amazing technology. It's amazing technology, but then it got to a point once that VR started showing some promise that it was natural to think, why don't we use these game engines and start developing them for virtual reality? So now we have technology that's evolving, and that's what we use. And it's not easy. It's not easy to work with a game engine. But there's hope, there's hope because right now we use Unreal Engine, and Unreal Engine doesn't require any coding. It's C++ underneath, but you don't have to be a coder. This is something a lot of people don't understand. So even though the technology is complex and there's a learning curve, it's great news. It's great news they don't have to be a programmer or a developer to create a VR experience. I guess that gives me an opportunity to say a little bit about Chronos, my company. Well, we're working on a number of things, but one of the things that we have is we have a school for VR. We were the first ones that last year to start a school for virtual reality development right here in Seattle. We've been very successful with that, and our most popular course is Unreal Engine. We have an extensive curriculum. We have audio for VR. We have things that some companies don't even have right now in terms of the curriculum that we offer. We have some top-notch instructors. And the idea is that we want everybody doing VR. We don't want people to just go to the store, so to speak, buy an experience, and then come home and consume it. Ultimately, in VR, you don't even have to go to the store. You can do it from your home. But the point is, we don't want that. We want people to literally participate in creating these experiences that will then become part of a virtual world. A vast world, a world like the one that we know today, a digital world. Many people refer to it as the metaverse. It's a science fiction term coined by Neil Stephenson, who is an author from Seattle, a science fiction author. Many people know him. He wrote a book called Snow Crash, as well as many others, and he coined the term metaverse. It's a universe where there are jobs, there's real estate that people buy and sell, there's a lot of transactions going on, and I'm confident that that's going to happen, but we don't want to just wait for somebody to create it. We actually are actively working to make that a reality. Now, there are other companies that are working on the same thing, I really believe. I know that the guys at Oculus are very passionate about that. So they're not trying to create games. They're actually they're working on something much bigger. And I have to think that if they have that mindset, which I'm confident that they do, and they were purchased by Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg backing them, I have to think that Mark Zuckerberg has a very similar idea. But ultimately, it's going to be a closed system. A lot of these companies are working on closed systems, and we're doing something unique, which is working towards an open source platform, something that is just open and free, and nobody has to pay to be there. So that's our grand vision. Now, how do we get there, right? Well, one way to get there is that we want everybody creating VR experiences. And so we have the school to train people on how to do that with complex technology, because there's no way around it right now. But we're also working on making the technology easier, as well as the big companies. We work directly with Epic. They're working on the same thing. How do we make this easier for people to create games and VR experiences so it's not so complex? But what we have right now is pretty remarkable. We have people that take an 8-week course with us, and they walk away able to create a game, able to create a VR experience that's pretty decent. So that's also remarkable. And another thing that we're working on, I guess I can talk about this. I'm not really supposed to, but we have an idea that we're developing that involves people doing a drag and drop of objects and assets that are digital assets. It's another market for a lot of people to earn money. And that'll make it easier for people to create this experience. They can choose the setting, and they can create their story. And that's as much as I want to say about that. And then we're also creating experiences ourselves. We're working on a number of things for Steam VR, which is Valve's game distribution platform. And we have some unique things that are going to be released at the same time that we have high-end VR headsets available for sale. And that time will be end of April. That's the promise anyways. It was supposed to be Christmas last year. Then some deadlines weren't met, so it'll be end of April. I do believe that the hardware is very stable, and it's ready for being sold to consumers. So that's coming, and when it does, there will be new marketplaces where people can purchase these experiences, and we'll have some of ours for sale. So I hope that covers everything that we are about. This slideshow talks about the differences between AR and VR, which is what I was talking about earlier. So one of the things I really like about VR, it's a simulated world. It's a computer-generated world. And you can create things that just are not possible otherwise. Somebody might argue about that, okay? Somebody might say, no. There will come a day when we can have flying cars, and we can have the hoverboard, and we can do some things like that. But I'm not very optimistic about that, frankly. I wouldn't put my money into that. I wouldn't put my time into that. There are a lot of even political challenges that I think are easier to do in VR than it would be in the physical world. But in VR, you can do anything. In VR, you could create this room. You could make it upside down if you wanted, and you'd be walking on the ceiling as opposed to where we are right now. Like the physics are different. You can sort of bend the laws of physics, and you can create rich worlds like this one, like this image that I'm using. Basically, whatever your imagination can conceive, you can create that in VR. That's what's so exciting. We're going to create new realities. AR, I don't want to talk too much about AR, but basically AR, augmented reality, is using the physical space that you're in and then bringing in 3D objects into that and augmenting your world. So when we think of AR, a lot of people think of Microsoft HoloLens and Magic Leap. Some people know about Magic Leap. I was talking earlier about the major investments that we've had in this technology. And Magic Leap had some major investment from Google. They had over $550 million from Google invested in a company that's a startup company. It's pretty crazy, right? And they don't talk about what they have. It's pretty secret. You'd have to go down to Florida to talk to them. And even then, they would probably want your money before they even talk to you. Josh, how much time do I have? 10 minutes. So anyways, Magic Leap recently had an investment from Alibaba, a Chinese company, for over $870 million, which is pretty crazy. It's almost $1 billion of investment, right? Just investment alone. So they're going to come up with some technology that involves not having the headset the way that we have. It's not like putting a screen in front of your eyes. It's totally different. And so that's basically the difference between AR and VR. VR is a simulated world where you're immersed and you forget that you're here. AR is more about enterprise applications. You could be working on something, let's just say fixing a car or fixing a spacecraft, and you don't know what you're doing, but somebody that does know can see what you see, exactly what you see, through a camera that you have on your headset or in front of your eyes, and they can tell you what you should be doing. So there's a lot of application for that would be different from VR. But eventually, VR and AR are going to combine into one technology. So I try not to focus too much on VR versus AR because that is already happening, and it's happening faster than we can imagine, I would say. I believe that the evolution of this technology is going to be super fast. We had that happen. It's been the case. PC took decades, and then mobile was, iPhone came out in 2007, 2013. Everybody already had a smartphone. So VR will also happen super fast, and I think that's very exciting. If you don't take my word for it, okay? Check out the tech that we have right now, and just keep in mind that most of that development happened in about 3 years. So prior to 3 years, we didn't have any of that. So, I talked about virtual reality. That's the Oculus Rift over here that's going to be shipped. These are high-end headsets. We have hundreds of VR headsets now. We have some cheap things that we can show you. China is just flooding the market as expected. But when it comes to high-end VR experiences, which is what I'm passionate about, there's very few. So there's the HTC Vive made by Valve Corporation and HTC. And then there's the Oculus Rift, which is funded by Facebook. That image there is just to give you an idea of, these are people in VR, but this is what they're experiencing. And this image is actually done by a company called The Void. They're down in Utah, and they're creating these theme parks that are amazing. They're just really rich, and it's kind of like going through Disney. So you can check out The Void and watch their video. I talked a little bit about augmented reality. This is the Microsoft HoloLens, and that's Magic Leap, just to give you an idea of what augmented reality would look like. There's actually an actual video that you can watch about that. That's the promise anyways. AR is definitely not there yet. So everything that you see when you see a Microsoft commercial, I would say just be wary the technology is not there. What they're showing you is not what you would see through the headset. It's a marketing thing. It'll get there. I believe it'll get there, but we're not there yet. Same thing with Magic Leap. Whereas VR, it's already there. So head-mounted displays. This is a display called Meta that it actually does VR and AR. You can kind of flip a button and you can see the room, and then when you press the button, then you can't see it anymore. You see an actual background generated by the computer. This is the Gear VR. It's a very popular one because this is mobile. The weakness of Gear VR is that it doesn't have positional tracking, but Oculus is now actively working on positional tracking for Gear VR. So when you try this one in the room, which you can, you're going to notice that you can look around in 360, but when you move, the world that you're in moves with you. That's the difference compared to the other headsets. I don't like Google Cardboard. I have it there just for show because it's a good way to get people into VR. But I think it's more of a gimmick when it comes to VR. The Oculus Rift. It can already be pre-ordered, by the way. Palmer Luckey keeps saying, you can pre-order the Oculus Rift, and you'll be able to pre-order the HTC Vive very soon. The weakness of the Oculus Rift right now is that it doesn't have a controller. It actually has a touch controller, but that won't become available until December, or that's the promise, whereas the HTC Vive that we have in there already has controllers made for VR. This is a very unique thing. So when this goes on sale, it'll have the Xbox controller, which I personally don't like. This was not built for VR. This was built and designed for gaming, for a console. So I like pure VR. I'm preparing Kronos to work with technology we don't have yet. So we're still a few years away from what we really are out to create. But we're getting there. I'm happy with the development that we have so far. That's the HTC Vive. These are two unique controllers. The ones that you're going to see there don't look like this because this is a more polished version, right? What we have is a prototype version 1. So this looks a lot more polished, but trust me, there's two ways to look at this, okay? You can look at this and say, wow, this is amazing. This is totally revolutionary, groundbreaking, which is true. Another way to look at it for me is, we're going to look back a few years and just laugh at how this stuff looked because it was so bulky and it just primitive, Ultimately, VR, the way that we envision it, has to work the same way that we interact with the real world as we do now. The experience that we're aiming at creating will be as real as anything. Your brain won't know the difference. So right now we're working with visual and audio, which is big. And then the controllers provide for interaction with your hands. But eventually it'll be your full body. There are already a lot of suits on the market for haptics. And then eventually we'll get to smell somehow. I haven't figured that out yet. But it's smell and other things. Basically anything that gives information to your brain that creates the experience that you're having of the world that you're in. If you can manipulate that, then you can control that. You can manufacture your own experience, so to speak, which is different from what we have now, I would say. These are some of the technologies that we work with. These are three major game engines. Unreal and Unity are actually becoming the VR technology or the VR game of choice. CryEngine is falling behind. They're a German company, and they just don't have the resources that these other two have. These other two are American companies. Unity is based here in Bellevue. Unreal is in North Carolina. They also have an office here. We work closely with Unreal because it really is an amazing engine it's free. If they collect royalties, but it's a free engine. You can just download it and use it. And if you want to create an experience for VR, you can come take our course, and we'll teach you how. So you don't have to go through the hurdle of learning how to use a very rich and complex game engine. Other tools that we use are 3D modeling tools for art. So we use Maya, we use 3ds Max, and ZBrush. These are kind of three main tools. ZBrush is great for character sculpting. So we are literally creating characters like that right now. This is what we're doing. Just a high level of detail. A lot of perfection goes into it. This is a lot of work. This guy actually focuses on doing 3D printing of his models, but now we're having a focus on importing them into VR. The next step will be on animating it, right? Creating animation with these characters, and it can be anything that you want. And then the next step will be to add AI to some of these characters, so you can go to a store and purchase some clothing, and you're interacting with somebody that may or may not be a real person. It could be a real person. That depends on what you want or what the story wants to provide. But they could be using very well a robot, so to speak. You know, you're enjoying yourself talking to that person just as it would be in a video game. So that's kind of where it's going. Hyperreality is what we call it. You know, I mentioned before the metaverse as a science fiction term that Neil Stephenson created. But hyperreality is not science fiction. Hyperreality is actually an academic term that some pioneers 10 years ago started working on, and they tested it in labs, and they proved that it's doable. So everything I'm telling you in terms of hyperreality is actually doable. John Tiffin is an English professor, and then the other guy is from Japan. And they got together, and they just really they created a blueprint for this technology. Basically, you're interacting with people in other parts of the world in real time, and it's pretty cool. Hyperreality, I talked a little bit about it. You know, it's the combination of several technologies: virtual reality, telecommunications, artificial intelligence. So some of the things that we have in hyperreality is telepresence, teleportation, teletranslation. Teletranslation is something I'm working on because I would like for people to communicate without the challenge of a language barrier. There's a lot of progress that we've made with this already. Skype is doing a lot of teletranslation. So there's a lot of technology that Microsoft has already developed. Some of these technologies, by the way, we don't have to create as a company. We can just use their API. We can just work with what they've developed. And yeah, you know, creating new realities. This is my last slide. Hyperreality is possible. It's something that we're just very passionate about. I believe that computers were built for virtual reality, for hyperreality, for creating this new world. We never figured out why computers, right? You know, maybe it was because of spreadsheets, because spreadsheets are so powerful, and before we had to do everything with a calculator. And yeah, spreadsheets are great, but I think there's something much bigger than that. And now we are having this digital world that we live in. So many of our friends are digital, especially the new generation, right? Don't think in terms of older generation. Think of the new one, you know? I have a friend that came my way recently. She learned about us, and we reconnected after a long time, and she said, you know, my daughter, she spends all her time on Instagram. Like, she does homework on Instagram, like, a lot of time. So it's just an example of how people already live in the digital world, and how is that going to evolve? VR is actually going to be something where people are going to spend a lot of time in, and I am not here to make any judgments about that. I just really believe that'll be the case. So we want to do it. We want to do it right. We want to set the standards in terms of user experience. When you're in that room, how do you explore a vast world when you're actually in that small room? Teleportation is one of the ways. That has to be done nicely. We already have some ideas for that. I could show you something if we have time. Locomotion is another way. You stay put, but you experience the world around you moving. So things like walking and driving will become obsolete. Josh, do I still have more time, or?
No, you don't.
Okay. So thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it very much.